His journey led him deep into the heart of the rainforest, where the air was thick with moisture and the scent of earth and decay filled his lungs. The village elders welcomed him, but when he mentioned Kibo, a heavy silence fell over the room. Faces turned grim, eyes darted nervously. An old man finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You should leave," he warned. "Kibo does not forget, and he does not forgive." Carter leaned in, pressing for answers. The villagers shared the stories, the warnings. Some said Kibo had lived far beyond a gorilla's natural lifespan, watching generations rise and fall, always remembering, always waiting. Others claimed he had once trusted humans, until they betrayed him. Now he ruled the jungle like a phantom, appearing only to those who had trespassed too far, and those who met his gaze never came back the same, if they came back at all. But Carter was not deterred. He was a man of science. Legends were born from truth, and he intended to find that truth. Armed with his equipment, he set off into the jungle, the dense canopy swallowing him whole. Hours turned to days as he followed the faintest of clues. Footprints in the mud, broken branches, eerie silence where there should have been noise. He was getting closer. Then, one evening, as the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the trees, he saw it, a massive figure, barely visible between the leaves, watching him. A pair of deep, golden eyes locked onto his, and in that instant, Carter felt something he never had before. Not just fear, not just awe, but recognition. Kibo knew him. Dr. Elias Carter's breath caught in his throat. He had spent years searching for this moment, yet nothing could have prepared him for the sheer presence of the creature before him. Kibo stood motionless, half hidden in the shadows of the jungle, his massive frame blending into the trees like he was part of them. But it was his eyes, deep, golden, unwavering, that sent a shiver down Carter's spine. It wasn't the gaze of a wild animal. It was something else, something far more knowing. Carter slowly reached for his camera, careful not to make any sudden movements. The moment he lifted it, Kibo let out a low, guttural sound, a warning. Carter froze. The gorilla didn't move, didn't bare his teeth, didn't charge. He simply watched, studied, as if he were the one documenting Carter instead. Minutes passed in eerie silence. The jungle around them held its breath. Carter could hear his own heartbeat, thudding in his ears. He had encountered wild gorillas before, observed them from a distance, gained their trust. But this was different. This was personal. He felt it in his bones. Then, without warning, Kibo turned and disappeared into the thick foliage. Carter exhaled, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His instincts screamed at him to follow. He had come too far to let Kibo vanish now. Tightening his grip on his backpack, he stepped forward, carefully pushing past vines and towering roots, tracking the faint sounds of movement ahead. The jungle grew darker as the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching like fingers across the forest floor. Carter pressed on, his pulse quickening with every step. He could sense it. Kibo was leading him somewhere. But where? Suddenly, a noise broke the silence. Not the usual rustling of leaves or distant cries of birds. It was something else. A deep, thunderous sound that vibrated through the air. A roar, long, drawn out, filled with a primal intensity. And it wasn't Kibo. Carter stopped dead in his tracks. His mind raced. He wasn't alone. Something else was here. Something dangerous. The roar sent a chill down Carter's spine. It was deep, guttural, and filled with a primal rage. He had heard the calls of gorillas before, but this was different. This wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge. Just endless green, shifting with the breeze. His pulse quickened. He wasn't alone. Suddenly, Kibo let out a deep, resonant growl. Not of anger, but of warning. Carter's instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet remained planted. He had come too far to turn back now. Whatever truth his father had found, whatever secret Kibo guarded, it was here, and it was watching him. Carter tightened his grip on the notebook. He wasn't sure if he had just uncovered history or awakened something far more dangerous. The jungle was no longer just a place of mystery. It was alive, breathing, watching. Carter could feel it pressing in around him, the weight of unseen eyes in every shadow. Kibo stood firm beside the ancient carvings, his massive form unmoving, his golden gaze locked on the darkness beyond. Whatever was out there, it had been waiting, and now it was here. Carter's grip on his father's notebook tightened. The last words on the page echoed in his mind. He knows what we did? But who was we? What had his father uncovered? And why had Kibo led him here now? He took a slow step forward, his breath steady, but his heart pounding. The jungle remained silent, unnervingly so. No birds, no insects, just stillness. Then a crunch, a single footstep on dry leaves. Carter froze. This wasn't an animal, this was human. A shadow shifted between the trees, barely visible, but unmistakable. Someone else was here, someone who had been waiting for him to find this place. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. Was this why his father never returned? Had he discovered something he wasn't supposed to? Kibo suddenly let out a deep, reverberating grunt, a threat. He ducked behind a thick tree, steadying his breathing as he scanned the dense jungle. Somewhere in the shadows, Kibo was watching, waiting. Then movement, a blur of dark fur, a massive shape shifting between the trees. Carter's pulse pounded in his ears. He wasn't sure whether to run or stand his ground. Before he could decide, another sound reached him. Not a roar this time, but something softer, a rustling, footsteps. But not from an animal, from a person. His hands tightened around his camera. Was someone else out here? A poacher? Another researcher? He hadn't seen any signs of human activity, yet the jungle had its own way of hiding things and keeping secrets. Carter crouched low, moving carefully through the undergrowth. He followed the sound, pushing past vines, his heart hammering in his chest. Then, through the tangled leaves, he saw it. An old, abandoned campsite. Tattered tents, overturned crates, rusting equipment covered in moss. It had been here for years, left to be swallowed by the jungle, but something about it felt eerily familiar. He stepped forward, brushing away leaves, revealing a weathered notebook lying half buried in the dirt. His fingers trembled as he picked it up. The name on the cover sent a jolt through him. Dr. Richard Carter. His father's name. Carter's breath hitched. His father had disappeared 2 decades ago, lost in this very jungle while studying primates. No one had ever found him. No trace, no body, just rumors. Now, standing in the ruins of what had once been his camp, Carter felt the weight of something far greater than coincidence. Kibo had led him here. He flipped open the notebook, the pages brittle with age. The handwriting was his father's, notes, sketches, observations, but the last entry was what made his blood run cold. He remembers. He always remembers. Of trust, of betrayal, of memory that stretched beyond generations. And then he saw it. A carving of a gorilla, Kibo, and beside him, the figure of a man. Carter's heart pounded as the realization set in. This wasn't just a legend. This wasn't just a story passed down by frightened villagers. This was history. A history his father had uncovered. A history that Kibo had never forgotten. The jungle had always kept its secrets, but now Carter was standing in the heart of one. Carter traced his fingers over the ancient carvings, his mind spinning with questions. Who had built this? How long had it been here? And what did his father know about it? The answers felt just out of reach, buried beneath years of jungle growth and forgotten history. But Kibo knew. He had always known. The great silverback remained still, his golden eyes fixed on Carter as if waiting for him to understand. This place, this story, it was more than just the past. It was a warning, a lesson written in stone and memory. Carter turned the pages of his father's notebook, flipping through sketches and notes until he reached the final entry. The handwriting was rushed, the ink smudged as if written in urgency. His father had been here. He had stood where Carter stood now, and his last words sent a shiver down his spine. I was wrong. He remembers everything. He knows what we did. Carter's breath caught. His father had uncovered something that had cost him his life. But what? What had Kibo seen? What did he remember that the world had chosen to forget? A low rumble echoed through the trees. Kibo stepped back, his gaze shifting toward the shadows beyond the ruins. Carter followed his stare, the hairs on his arms rising. Something was there, watching, waiting. Then a sound, soft, almost imperceptible. A whisper carried by the wind. Carter turned sharply, scanning the jungle, but he saw nothing. Carter barely had time to process the words before a low growl rumbled behind him. He turned slowly, his breath shallow. There, standing just feet away, was Kibo, his golden eyes locked onto Carter's, unblinking. In that moment, Carter understood. Kibo hadn't just led him to his father's camp, he had brought him to the truth. Carter's grip tightened around the notebook as his mind raced. His father had been here in this very spot, writing these words. But what had he discovered? And why had he never returned? He swallowed hard, his eyes locked on Kibo. The great silverback stood motionless, his golden gaze filled with something Carter couldn't quite name. It wasn't aggression, it wasn't fear, it was something deeper, something ancient. The jungle felt different now, the air heavier, the shadows darker. Carter slowly rose to his feet, never breaking eye contact with Kibo. The gorilla did not move, did not blink. Then, as if making a decision, he turned and started walking away. Not disappearing into the trees like before, but moving with purpose, slow, deliberate steps. He wanted Carter to follow. Carter hesitated only for a moment before his feet carried him forward. Through twisted roots and tangled vines, he followed Kibo deeper into the jungle, the towering canopy above swallowing the last traces of sunlight. The air grew cooler, the sounds of the forest faded, and then suddenly, they were there. A clearing, an ancient stone structure half hidden beneath moss and vines, rising like a forgotten monument. Carter's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't natural. This wasn't something built by animals. It was man-made. But by who? And why? Kibo stopped at the base of the structure, his massive hand resting against the stone. Carter approached slowly, running his fingers over the weathered carvings. Symbols, stories, primitive, yet intentional. They told a tale of a man and a beast. For centuries, locals have spoken in hushed voices about the legend of Kibo, the gorilla that never forgets. Some claim he has seen generations come and go, watching, waiting, remembering. Others tell a darker tale, one of betrayal, vengeance, and a jungle that never forgives. They say Kibo was not always a ghost of the jungle. Once he was just another silverback, a powerful leader among his kind. But something changed. Something that left a mark on him deeper than any wound. It wasn't just time that shaped him, it was memory. A memory so sharp, so unrelenting, that it turned him into a creature of both awe and fear. Hunters whispered of golden eyes that stared through the darkness, remembering every face, every scent, every betrayal. Some who entered his territory never returned. Others who barely escaped spoke of an intelligence far beyond what they expected. An animal who did not act on instinct alone, but on something more. Something chillingly human. Scientists tried to study him, drawn in by the mystery, but every expedition ended the same way. Equipment destroyed, camps abandoned. A single, terrifying realization left behind. Kibo was always watching, always listening, and he never, ever forgot. But why? What secret lies buried deep within the jungle? What did Kibo witness all those years ago? And why does he remember what the world has long forgotten? What happens when a memory lasts longer than a lifetime? What happens when a gorilla never forgets? Dr. Elias Carter had spent his life searching for the extraordinary. A seasoned wildlife researcher, he had heard countless stories of mythical creatures and lost species, but none fascinated him quite like the legend of Kibo. A gorilla with a memory sharper than time itself, a guardian of the jungle whose past was shrouded in mystery. The more he heard, the more obsessed he became. He needed to see Kibo with his own eyes. Not a threat, but a statement. A command. The figure in the trees hesitated, then slowly stepped into the dim light. Carter's breath caught. A man, weathered, worn, his clothes tattered, his beard thick with years of neglect. But his eyes were unmistakable. Carter's legs nearly gave out beneath him. It was his father. Dr. Richard Carter stood before him, alive, yet changed. His face was unreadable, his posture tense. For a long moment, neither spoke. The jungle held its breath. Then, in a voice rough from years of silence, his father finally whispered, "You shouldn't have come."